say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Welcome back. We had a summer off, so we're back to First Time for Everything. And tonight's guest is JD Estrada. I'm really excited to have you on the show, JD. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
It is wonderful to be back in my home of Go Indie now. My name is JD Estrada. Hello, fellow humans. I am a Puerto Rican indie author. I write in a variety of genres, and I do a lot of stuff to keep myself entertained and out of trouble. This includes a lot of social media stuff and random stuff, from doing food polls and snack tests and taste tests to sock posts where I show the socks that I have for today. And today, I'm feeling Nintendo vibes. I do dictionaries. I do stuff like that. I write poetry. I write middle grade, and whatever soul will is calling to me to write, I indulge that muse, because if a muse wants to dance, who am I to say no?
Yeah. I think you and I are a lot alike in that way. I'm the same way. Whatever pops in my head, I write and run with it. So here's a question. So you write a lot of different things. Do you always write it under JD Estrada, or do you write it under different things as well?
So far, I've only written under JD Estrada. Professional stuff I have written under my real name. My civilian name is Jorge de Jesus. The thing is that if you're going to write about angels, demons, and vampires and stuff like that, and you have Jesus in your surname, it kind of throws people off. And I have written and contributed. I work in advertising, and I have done stuff like under my real name. But anything that's creative in mine has been under the JD Estrada pen name. If I ever write erotica, it's going to be under another pen name. I'm not going to say which one. And in about 30 years' time, I will reveal it, and people will go like, oh my.
That's funny. So if you wrote erotica, would it be under a male or a female, or a generic kind of pen name?
To take a slight page out of Maynard James Keenan and Maynard James Keenan's approach to music, I would probably try to express myself more under a female pen name. When he sings under Tool, it's very male dominated, and it's very spiritual and very intense. When he writes under Perfect Circle, he tries to tap more into his feminine side, and I'm pretty sure I would like to do that more, just because I think when it comes to erotica, women are superior, and I would like to tap my inner woman just to do something better.
We have both sides, but I have to say, you're going to do that. You just got to get ready for feminine rage, because it's going to come out,
Oh, I know. And I know that if my name comes out, I'm going to break a lot of hearts and traumatize people. It's like, oh Lord.
Yeah. That's good though. Yeah. It's good to keep people on their toes. All right. So you are a writer. Do you kind of partake in any other creative areas?
I play music and sing, but I've tried to be in 2.5 bands. The half is because it just never took off, and they had so many issues. Good people, talented, we had chemistry, but everyone was going through stuff. So that never happened. But I do play music. I have posted several videos on YouTube. People say, yeah, that's not bad. But that's not bad. It's not going to pay the bills. And I don't think I could be a superstar. Maybe some people would disagree with me, but that's just because they're being nice. Apart from that, other creative stuff, the only other things that I do is I bodyboard, but not professionally, I'm really not good enough to compete in a contest, but I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I actually bodyboarded when I was younger. I grew up on the East Coast and grew up in like New York and then New Jersey, which has some decent waves. And yeah, I spent some time in the water. Yeah.
I've seen some good swells in New Jersey. I still haven't surfed stateside. If I would surf somewhere, New Jersey on the East Coast, New Jersey would be an option. But if I had my pick, it would probably be North Carolina. The Outer Banks.
The Outer Banks. Yes, I actually wrote a story there for that reason because I actually grew up in Wilmington, spent some time in Wilmington as well, and so I spent some time in the Outer Banks. And yeah, get a good storm on North Carolina's coast, in the Outer Banks, get some great waves for sure.
You're fully convincing me.
Yes, yeah. I'm always for the adventure, you know. So very cool. Yeah. So I dabble in art. I'm not a musician. I actually did piano as a young person, but somewhere along the way I scrapped that. So yeah, I dabble in art too. But I think it's good to have some different mediums. So when you get a little blocked up, you have something you can kind of focus on for a little bit and then come back to.
Okay, but if you came across a piano, could you at least carry a tune?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I actually went to state for piano and did all that but it was parental pressure that eventually drove me away from it. So yeah, so I haven't in years.
But you have to retake that and just get past that hump and tap into what you enjoy because it's a beautiful instrument.
It is.
I just suck at it. I tried, and in terms of musical ability, my oldest brother, Lord, can he play the piano? It's something beautiful.
Yeah, there is a beauty in somebody that can play the piano, that can just get on there and jam out. I feel the same. I try to do guitar and I just never could get it. Just couldn't take it down. But I guess we all have our thing.
I tried taking classes, and after the second class, I was like, yeah, chun 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 chun. I was like, nah, this is not for me. So basically, everything that I've learned has been by ear. I can't read music, but I've composed. There's I have 30 tracks on YouTube and a couple of covers. I even covered Wonderwall from Oasis, but I did a different arrangement, slower. The regular arrangement has the capo on the second fret. I took that off so that it would be at a lower key, and I like that one.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah, I like that song anyway, so I'll check it out for sure. Very cool. So let's go back and let's talk about first. So going back to kind of when you were a child or whenever it was that you were like, I want to be a creative. I want to be a writer, whatever it was that first kind of triggered that creativity in you. When was that and what was that?
Well, as a kid, I always said that I wanted to be an inventor. I saw Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I saw Flubber. Yeah. And I was like, I want to be something like that. and then I ended up studying psychology, advertising, and marketing in college. But somewhere along the way, I wrote something. I think the first time that I wrote a short story that was really worthwhile, it was 9th grade. And the teacher was like, this is special. You should do more of this. And then I tried to write another story, and I was like, this one's generic. Look at your first story. Look at what you did right, and do more of that. And looking back, it was a good lesson in the sense that in the first one, I was really enjoying myself, and I was just tapping into something that was really pure. And the second one, I was trying way too hard. Yeah. And when you try way too hard, you get in your own way. So that's the first time that I saw that. Then in college, I always enjoyed writing essays. And I remember in one class in Spanish, I got straight A's throughout both semesters with that professor because first off, she made it fascinating and interesting. And second off, we had a rapport, and she was like, oh Lord, I had to grade these tests that were awful. And I had it as my mission that when she read whatever I wrote, she was going to enjoy herself. And and I would always get like really, glowing marks. Like, first off, this is very entertaining. This is very fun, but it is also based on the information that you had to include. So doubly thank you. First off, for being a responsible student. Second off, for making me laugh my ass off. And I was like, yeah. Then that short story that I told you about that was worthwhile, I retook it. I submitted it to a competition in college, and it won third place. And it won third place for one simple reason. I did not proofread it, and I should have. And the typos, I know that it brought me down a notch, but really enjoyed it. And that's, it's called I Divinita. And are you a fan of Pearl Jam, or are you familiar with Pearl Jam?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, do you know Vitalogy?
Mm-hmm.
There's a track that is the song with no words that's called I Davanita. And it's like, it's like a mumble. Well, it's Eddie mumbles.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you just described that.
And if Pearl Jam was a color, that's what I would bleed. That's the color of the blood that I would bleed. But I saw that song, and I put that song on repeat, and I wrote on that. And I didn't know that would be so important in terms of how I would write my first novel. So I did that, and then I went through, again, advertising, psychology, and marketing. And I ended up going the advertising route. And somewhere someone invited me to write on a blog. And I really enjoyed it. And from writing something snarky and silly, one time I wrote something profound, and then someone from India and from England and from different places, people were connecting to our blog. And I was like, I really like this. I think I can write a novel. That's a hell of a leap, but that's how it happened. And I outlined it, and I started writing. So if I published in 2013, so 2006, I decided I'm gonna start doing this, and I was writing everything by hand. So a lot of lessons learned, a lot of things that I will never do again, a lot of things that I will do again, but from how I did something in a short story in high school to how I retook that story and saw that it had worth and merit and people connected to it, to writing in a blog, and in that blog doing a short story here, a poem there, and stuff like that, and seeing people's response and seeing the amount of dopamine that I released because of that. And I was like, buddy, you're a writer. And then I started the novel, and how it started is so stupid. So I have the TV to my left, I have the computer to my right, my legs are up, I'm listening to music. So obviously I'm multitasking like an idiot. And then I see a commercial for Underworld, and I go, I can write something like that. That's the inception of the idea. So that first book and those first chapters, there's going to be elements that are very familiar to Underworld and The Matrix and stuff like that, which were things that stuck in my craw. And I did it on purpose because I wanted to begin with something familiar and then just flip it on its head and go into something deep. I just didn't know how deep and how personal and how much it would grow on me. And at the end of the day, from when I started the first novel and I published the first novel and I published the second novel to finishing the series earlier this year, it took 17 years. And I was like, okay, so yeah, we're legal of age as a writer. And it was a hell of an experience and a hell of a learning experience and a personal learning experience, as a writer, what to do, what not to do. And as a human, stuff that, because when you're in flow, in that flow state, you tap into stuff that you go like, oh, I didn't know that was there. And at all times, I learned to lean into that. And the more I leaned into it, the better it felt in terms of what the story was, how it flowed, and how I allowed myself to discover new and different things. I've been mulling it over since March, just because it was a very intense process. and it's just unpacking a lot of stuff and a lot of stress. It's like, I finished the series. Is it okay? And all of those wonderful insecurities that come with being a writer. Oh, they're so delicious.
Yeah, it's funny because you said that. I was thinking two things. One, it's interesting where we get our inspirations from. Like people, that's a question I always get asked: is where do you find your inspiration? I'm like, it's literally the most random things. I could be walking the dog, or I could be listening to a song, or I could be, watching a show. And like, so for example, like I took a 15-year hiatus from writing, and then I was watching The Umbrella Academy, the first season. And it wasn't that the story inspired me as much as it was that the writing inspired me, like how they wrote characters. And I was like, I want to write again. Like it just kind of like brought that feeling up again that I hadn't had for 15 years. And I embraced it. And I went on to write my first novel.
Was it the character development? Was it the dialogue, or was it the plot? What really called to you?
Two, the character, I'm big on characters. Like when I do stuff, I'm big on character and dialogue. And so it was the pacing of the dialogue I loved. It was fast, it was smart, it was funny, but it also like had those feelings, so it was good dialogue. And then the character development as well. Like those were the things I was like, I missed that about writing. So like that kind of inspired me to write again. And my story is nothing like that. It was just literally getting like that excitement about writing, and so like that was my inspiration. And I can't tell people, like they'll be like, well, how do you get inspired? I'm like, I really couldn't tell you. I could literally walk out the door and a bird flying by could somehow inspire me. So I think it's really important to embrace inspiration. The other thing I was thinking about is we were talking about music a lot, and then we were talking about kind of like your first story, and that interested me because one of the things I always say about music is, a lot of times a really good album by a band is their first album. Back when they're struggling and they're suffering and they're pulling everything out of them to put that into the album. And the more successful they get, the majority. There are great bands that do great albums no matter what, but the more successful and better off they get and where they aren't struggling, also their music, to me, gets a little flat. How do you prevent that from happening when you write?
By always going for what I really, really want to write. I never write to market. I never pander. I never write what I'm supposed to write. I'm going to be proofreading and editing this. I don't know how many times. So I need to keep myself guessing and myself entertained. And if I can achieve that, then I'm doing something right. And the more you write and the more you read, the more you want to do something that's fun and interesting. And yes, you should write something that's marketable and sellable and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I've reread my own books. And when I reread my own books, I don't know how many times I've read something that I had forgotten. While writing Beyond Human and while even outlining it, I reread Only Human and Shadow of a Human. And I was like, I had forgotten this scene. And then there's other scenes that I remembered, but I remembered them differently, how they hit me differently. And reading them at different points in my life, I was like, I did something right, because it's not the same experience. So when it comes to certain bands, first off, if they play their classics, they embrace it. And to bring back Pearl Jam, originally, the first three songs that they recorded were Even Flow, Alive, and I don't know which one was the third one. It's the Mama San trilogy, and I forget which one was the third one. I'm not going to guess because I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm not going to figure it myself. But if you focus on Alive, how they played Alive originally and in the album, and how they play Alive now, and what Alive meant originally and what Alive means now, that people have embraced it, giving it its own flavor, giving it its own identity, and giving it a second life. That's what I want with my work, and that's what I strive for. I've had people that have reread me. It might be Jeremy, but I'm not sure. And again, I don't want to guess and get it wrong, because it's gonna be online and documented. And it's like, oh, the Pearl Jam fan forgot. But if you see specifically Alive, if you go to early performances, if you see the original album version, and if you see how they performed it, I think a good example is what they did in Imagine and Cornice, which is a concert film they have. how they build up the chorus, and it's the outro takes on a different feel to it. And I've had people go like, I read you 8 years ago, and then I reread you, and man, I found so many new things that I hadn't unpacked before. And it's just because I hadn't lived X or Y experience. And I can't think of a better, first off, that I'm worthy of being reread. And second off, that someone has an experience, not to the same level, because I'm not going to compare myself to that, but to The Little Prince. I read The Little Prince when way late, like in my 20s, then I read it in my 30s, then I've read it in my 40s, and I've read it in English and Spanish. Each time it hits different because I've lived through something. Each time I find something else, and the language is not complicated. So when I saw that experience, I was like, I want this. I want to do my best to achieve this. And so far, with at least some people and some of my projects, I have. And that's what I'm always going for. I'm not going for, first off, my vampires will never sparkle. Second off, if I sold 1 million books, that would be fantastic. But I'd rather be someone. I don't want to be the best writer someone reads. I want to be someone's favorite, because for me, those are two different things. One is the book that you're going to tell people at a cocktail party, like, oh, I read this book, and it's like, oh yeah, fancy. 1,001 books that you have to read. And another one is a person that says, you know what book you really have to read? This guy, because of this and this and that. And also, something that I really love, I pack so many Easter eggs and so many little details that only I know all of them. And it's fun when someone says, is this inspired by a lyric by this song? And I'm like, yes, because I'm a fan of the Eels. And I openly say that one of the characters in Shadow of a Human is based off of Rosie from A Whole Lot of Rosie from AC/DC. But there's a character called Jeremy to rebring Pearl Jam yet again, and stuff like that. And it's like little tributes and little nuggets, and giving it my spin, and giving some of these fallen heroes a little last hurrah. You know, I write for myself and hope that people go like, oh, that was cool. And so far, so good.
Yeah, and I like the point that you made about kind of going back. And I think that's important for us as writers, but also as readers, that, you know, something's going to hit you differently at different points in your life with different experiences that you have had. I've read books that I loved as a child that really spoke to me, and I read them again, and I was like, okay, yeah, they're good. And then other times I've read a book maybe in my teens or my early 20s that I was like, yeah, it's all right. And then all of a sudden it really speaks to me now, you know, like, so I think it's important to like look at our writing as not current, if that makes sense, like as something that's evolving over time, well beyond when we will be here. Like, we'll be long gone, and it might speak to somebody in 100 years. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, right?
For sure. And I spoke a little bit about the human cycle, but if we go to middle grade, how I wrote Given to Fly is thinking about how I felt reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I'm a huge fan of the Chronicles of Narnia, or at least most of the books. Some of the books are, the last book is wonky. And we can have a long conversation about which are my favorite books of the Chronicles of Narnia. But the first book I ever read that really blew me away, I was 8, and I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at least 8 times, maybe more. But I can't guarantee more. For sure, 8 times. I read it last year. When I read it, I was 42. And it didn't make me feel old. And I remember reading the first Percy Jackson book, and it made me feel like an old fart. And I was like, I never want something that I write middle grade to make someone feel old.
Yeah.
And it's you're flexing different muscles. And when I'm writing middle grade, the biggest rule is that there are no rules, and you just have to go with it. You have to flow. You have to think like a kid. You have to look at a jungle gym and say that's a spaceship. and invite yourself as an adult to look at something and say, that can be a spaceship. Why not? That can be a bat cave. That can be a secret lair of a super spy. And invite yourself to dive into that sandbox, because, and you can do that in other genres and for other age groups as well. But for middle grade, particularly, for me, that's super important, just because the true magic that I find in middle grade and why I enjoy writing it so much is because it makes me smile so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can have intense lessons, or you can traumatize people like Charlotte's Web.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a Charlotte's Web in me. I did include a series of characters based on Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. It is the Spiders in Given to Fly, and it is the dad, the mom, and the daughter. The daughter's called Charlotte for clear reasons. The mother is called Natasha Schneider, Natasha Spider, because of Natasha Schneider, who was a musician. She played keyboards for a band called 11. She played for Queens of the Stone Age. She was a beautiful woman, and unfortunately, she passed away from breast cancer. And I wanted to do a little tribute to her. And the dad is called Boris, because I'm a fan of The Who.
All right, very cool. Well, one of the things you mentioned that I actually liked was you were talking about middle grade, and I recently was a judge for a middle grade writing contest, or middle grade YA. And one of the things that I took away from that was that how many people think that just because they put somebody that's that age in the story, they think it's middle grade. And what they haven't done is actually tap into the brain of somebody in that age and kind of see life through their eyes. And so like, that was a big thing that I was frustrated with, was I was like, just because you put a teen in a book doesn't mean it's a teen's book. You're just an adult writing a teen's book. And for the love of Mike, do not use old slang. That's what I said. Parties are no longer off the hook or off the chain or whatever it is. Like, you have to really like immerse yourself, I think, when you're writing for certain age groups. It should be appealing. I think like I should be able to read it and still enjoy it too, but really who you're trying to appeal to, they should connect to it. And I think that that's a big kind of like, I guess, hump that a lot of people have a hard time getting over. What would you kind of think on that? Like, how do you put yourself in that position?
When I talk to a middle grade kid, their slang comes later in life. And I think that's why I don't write too much YA. And I think that's why, we can always be rad, dude.
Rad, man.
If you want to, if I use slang, it's probably because I'm going to be writing something in the 80s or 90s, and I want to use something that's appropriate and that I lived through and that I know it. But if not, odds are that I'll avoid slang just because it gets in the way. Mm-hmm. A good story is a good story, regardless if you use good slang or bad slang, or you use slang correctly or incorrectly. A good story is going to stick with you. And if you focus too much on slang and on researching on that, it's valid. And if that's what drives you, go for it. That's not what drives me. What drives me is going on an adventure, and an adventure is not dependent on that. I think that's why I also struggled with Percy Jackson, because it uses slang and it felt dated and made me feel dated. I was like, this feels dated and this is younger than I am. So, and also kids don't always have to have a cheeseburger and a milkshake. I don't know.
Right. They do eat other food.
Yeah. But when you have a conversation with a kid, like a proper kid, how they bounce from one thing to another and the things that fascinate them and the things that they dream about. Again, we're not entering into the teenage years and the teenage trauma and the whole boys and girls and all that identity stuff. It's more like, what's fun? What's fun? This is fun. What's tasty? This is tasty. And all the great part of that age of about 8 to 11, these are most of your core memories that you will remember like for the whole of your life come after age 7. 6 is debatable. Some people forget. 5, it's dicey. 4, I know my wife remembers stuff when she was like 3. I don't remember stuff. My oldest memory is a nightmare that I was drowning. Which is, I don't know if that's telling or not. And I'm sure that a psychologist would have a field day unpacking that. That said, when I went to see Pano, that's when I got a really good idea for a novel or a middle grade novel, or at least the bug to write something in that vein. First off, the kids that were in that theater, I wanted to write to those kids because those kids were well educated, well mannered. They knew when to laugh, they knew when to gasp, they knew when to cheer. I was like, guys, why aren't you contagious? Instead of cooties, it's goodies, because it's just good behavior all around. Second off, when I saw that movie, I saw that it had no violence, and I was like, aha. And I know that the Chronicles of Narnia is pretty violent, and it's way heavy on the Christian allegory. It's a little too heavy. Now that I can read it and know what C.S. Lewis was doing, I was like, dude, it's a bit heavy-handed. And the things that I like the most about that story is when it's at its most fantastical. So when I write middle grade, I don't just write for that kid. I want to write to the adult that still has that kid inside and says, I want to read something because everything's dull and boring. And it's like, nah, dude, we're gonna go on an adventure and we're gonna have fun. And to me, it's all about having fun.
I hear a lot of adults say that they read YA or middle grade because it is like a break from the heaviness of like the news and the world and that type of stuff. And they like kind of that aspect of being able to relive their youth or go on those adventures. I think that's really important. And then they said there's a fine line. Kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. I absolutely agree with that. I work at a library, and so I work with kids a lot. And I think a lot of times we, in our attempt to protect kids, we tend to kind of like overly put them in an eggshell, and forget that they're pretty smart and they have something to say and they want to be challenged mentally as well. So I was going to ask you, so you said your book, is it the first book you wrote that's middle grade, or are all of your books middle grade?
No. The first middle grade book that I wrote, not the first one. The first one that I wrote are short stories. I figured out that I just wanted to do bedtime stories or like Saturday morning cartoons. So it's a bunch of short stories that take place in the world of Draim. No, my first novel was urban fantasy, and actually my first event I had Only Human. So I had this. I had a poetry collection, which is Between the Tides, and it's the highs and lows of the tides of life. That's how I that's my spiel to sell it. And it has one of my favorite poems, which is called The Sea. And I also had the initial version of the Daydreams on the Sherbet Shore. The Daydreams were originally, they were printed out and they were hand bound, and my family, and when I say my family, my wife, my mother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, they helped me hand bound these things. So it was very physical. It was very tactile. It was very, homemade, and I wanted it to feel that way. So my foray as an author, it's like, okay, I'm a multi-genre author, and this is me proving it. So I started with middle grade short stories on urban fantasy. Some people have said that the human cycle is YA. I don't know. I didn't write it thinking it was YA. People say, "Oh, I write YA," and when you ask why, it's like, "Yeah, because they sell like hotcakes," and I'm like, "That's the wrong reason." So. In my doubt is because all of the characters, or none of the characters in the human cycle, are mid-teens, late teens. They're all in their 20s or beyond. You have vampires and angels that have been around for a while. So yeah, I think I answered your question, but I went on several tangents at the same time.
Yeah. I think, and I think that's where new adult kind of comes into, because I write too sometimes, and I'm like, people are like, is it YA? And I'm like, I don't think so. I think it's probably more new adult, kind of getting from that 18 to like mid 20s type of range.
Yeah, and it has adult situations and it has sex, but it's not graphic. And it has one scene that people were like, "Dude, why did you write that?" And I'm like, "Did you ever watch Bram Stoker's Dracula?" And they're like, "Yeah," and I read the book. And I'm like, "Yeah, but focus on the movie. Let's talk about the movie." There's a scene where Keanu is facing off with the brides, and it's like three buxom, beautiful women that are seducing him. And I wrote a scene spoofing that, and only like three people have said, like, "Dude, was this because of that?" And I'm like, "Yes." It's not because I'm depraved or I have any awkward fantasy. It's because I wanted to spoof on that, and people go like, "Ah, dude, makes so much sense." And I'm like, "Thank you for getting it, and thank you for not thinking that I was just a horn dog saying, 'Oh, he wants a foursome.'" It's like, no, dude, it's read past it.
Very much so, yeah. So what are you currently working on?
Mental health and balance. No.
Really?
No. I'm actually working on a speculative fiction short story collection, and I'm outlining three projects. Um, One project is a comedy, and it's set in an advertising agency. And if I'm ever gonna get canceled for a book that's not the human cycle because of the satanic component, because people are base, it's probably going to be that one. I'm pushing for it to be as outlandish, as out there, as in your face, as inappropriate as I can imagine. And if we've ever shared a beer or two, I can get pretty inappropriate. So I'm having all the fun there. Then I have two other projects, which are urban fantasies, one in English, one in Spanish. One is set in Puerto Rico, the Spanish one, and one is set in Atlanta, the English one. And they're going to be gritty and fun, and me making fun of tropes and trying to keep myself guessing. The Spanish one is set mainly in Old San Juan, just because I grew up. Mom and my grandfather had a store there, so I spent a lot of time there, and I'm very fond of Old San Juan. And I actually have a short story collection in Spanish called Penumbra. And a lot of the stories and the main novella takes place in Old San Juan. And it's just a place with so much character. And it's got a lot of character, and I have a lot of memories, and there's a lot to be addressed, because if you go to Old San Juan now, and so much of it is a tourist trap versus what I grew up in, that there's a lot to be written about that.
So when you say you write in Spanish and you write in English, what would you say are the differences in how you write those stories? Like, do you find like there's cultural differences as well as language differences?
When I write in Spanish, the default setting is to write something very Puerto Rican, or at least that short story collection came about because I got invited to write in a horror anthology, and it had to be either stories set in Puerto Rico or with a Puerto Rican feel or something to it. And I really, really leaned into that, and it was a lot of fun. And I found that I could tap into that. But before that, I had already written several short stories and essays and different things. And basically my voice, and when I say my voice, not just my author voice, but my speaking voice. People say that it's almost Jekyll and Hyde when I speak Spanish and speak English, because although I speak English pretty fast, I speak Spanish faster. And my tone of voice apparently is that my tone is higher in Spanish, I've heard. And I have a slight, I don't know if it's because I'm trying to sound authorial or what, or just because I tend to be more paused in English, but I just go at a different beat, and it's all about embracing that, culturally and language, just how you construct anything. When you write poetry, and when I write poetry, the muscles that I flex in each language are very different. And when I think of home, yes, I can communicate in English, but when I communicate it in Spanish, you're going to get that extra flavor, because if you speak to someone from Puerto Rico, to someone from Cuba, to someone from Dominican Republic, to someone from Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, Ecuador, Mexico, Spain, or whatnot, you're going to see that it's so different. One thing is to have an accent. Another thing is that the MO of the person and their aura is different. And that's my experience when I write in Spanish. Yes, I can write neutral Spanish, and part of the challenge is to write something that anyone who is Spanish speaking can understand. And people say, but is it that hard? And I'm like, I can guarantee that if someone from Spain or Argentina reads my Spanish collection, they're gonna have to look for a lot of words just because it's very Puerto Rican. I don't find that problem in English. And fortunately, English has allowed me to connect with people around the world. And English is my second language, which is curious because out of my 22 books, 18 are in English. And most of my work now is conduced in English. So it's a very peculiar experience. And leaning into a bilingual life and a Puerto Rican background is something that I haven't done as much in English, but it's something that I'm going to be exploring now, just because I felt like I had to prove that I could write without going into either Puerto Rican tropes or Puerto Rican themes or anything like that. And the people that I have that actually speak Spanish in the human cycle are from Spain. And it's because of where the plot takes place and different things. But it's also because I didn't want it to be a cliche. And I wanted to earn the right to write something in English, but Puerto Rican. So now that I'm 10 years into my career and 22 books into it, I go like, yeah, I can do it now. Although I did do an all English version of my bilingual collection, and that one, Margaret, who was in the chat, she read it. And that was a very interesting process. And that's when I realized how Puerto Rican my writing is. Because a text translator didn't help. It helped me absolute dick. And I basically had to rewrite everything. And then when I reread it, it was very interesting because I was like, unless you're in Puerto Rico, you're not going to get this. So I had to do some major plot adjustments to make sure that people understood what was being said or got the equivalent in another plot point or another joke or another remark or another aspect. It was eye-opening in so many ways, and definitely something to keep in mind if I ever translate Penumbra or I want to do something in both languages and launch it at the same time, which is something I've tinkered with in my mind, but it's a lot of work.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my next question was, did you ever have to do that and what was the differences? But you answered the question. So obviously there are a lot of differences. It's not just a straight translation. You have to actually kind of rework what you're doing. That's really fascinating, actually. Okay, so let's go back to first. And one of the questions I like to ask, because it kind of talks about, like, we tend to think of success as a kind of forward trajectory. But obviously when we fail, we learn. So talk about, like, when you first failed at something and what it taught you and how you use that to move forward.
There's so many failures. Which one should I pick? So in the first novel, when I'm transcribing, the first proper failure was realizing that I had messed up because something in chapter 24 didn't connect with something in chapter 40. Some people would consider that just a mistake. For me, I took it personally and I thought that it was a failure. And I learned from it a lot of things. First off, you got to be careful and you got to pay attention to the little details. Second off, the solution is probably not going to be a massive lift in terms of the work that you have to do, but it's going to be very precise. It's like when you see this huge machine that is not working and all you have to do is adjust one screw.
Right.
That was a huge lesson with that one. In terms of books, The Human Cycle sells pretty well. Given to Fly sells pretty well. Rhymes from the Wicked Nursery sells really well. The second book in the Daydreams does not sell very well. There are other books that don't sell very well. And would I take that as a failure, or that I haven't learned how to sell it correctly, or it's just hasn't found its audience? These are all things in the ether. Some people would take it as a failure, and there are some days where it does feel like a failure, and I want to be open about it, because people go like, no, blah blah blah, and they want to give it a spin. It's like, no, dude, if you feel like it's a failure, embrace what you're feeling and accept it, but also accept that you could be wrong. Things can change, and eventually it might take off. So one was in terms of writing and in terms of a big mistake. And I'll give you another one in terms of writing. So my first poetry collection, the first poem in that collection has a typo. But I wrote bury with 2 R's instead of 1. If you take a creative license, bury with 2 R's means that it has many burrs. Burrs are what plants have that when you're walking, they can cling onto your socks. And it's the husk that covers the seed. When I found out that it could mean that, it gave the poem a completely new meaning. So in a failure and a mistake, I saw beauty. So it exists with the typo in the collection, and I fixed the typo in the compendium that I have of the poetry collections. And finally, first Comic-Con, that Puerto Rico Comic-Con that I went, I did pretty well. Second, I did better. Then 2019, I had probably my best year till that point in the Puerto Rico Comic-Con. And then I did the Atlanta Comic-Con. So I went from selling this amount of books, and in this event, I sold 100 books less. Wow. In the first one, I made my booth, and the cost of the booth in the first day and the cost of printing by the end of the second day. So it was a really good event. Yeah. In the other one, it was a bust. So and that one hurt, because it's like, oh yeah, I'm breaking new ground, and I was trying to be enthusiastic, etc. But eventually, it was a big learning experience, because no way that was it a learning experience? Yes, but you can't take away that it was a failure, because I lost money. I invested time, I invested money, I invested effort. I put my best foot forward, and I believe in my work, and I've read my work, and I see value in it. And I saw other people whose work is not as good. And this is me being objective, because I read one of the books and I was like, this book is like really half cooked. But the art of selling and the way that they connected to the reader when they went to the booth, it was magical to see, because I saw someone across from me killing it. And he gave me so much good advice. So his victory and my failure, that was a compounded lesson. I didn't feel bad because I didn't have the sales that he had. And it's not like I wanted to take sales away. I was like, man, I got to learn from that guy. Exactly. So, and people and envy happens. But for me, it wasn't that. What I was really happy about at all times is that I always felt like, what am I not doing that I have to adjust? It's not like, why is that person doing well and I'm doing wrong? I'm like, what can I do better? And it was a combination of factors. First event that I did stateside, I'm a Puerto Rican indie author in Georgia. And how the event is organized probably didn't do me favors. Where I was located probably didn't do me favors. There was a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of competition, and people had to be mindful. And the people who go to other types of events know how to buy. The people who would go to that event are rookies in terms of going to conventions. So they would buy an overpriced Funko Pop at 3 booths, and then they would not have any money left over. And I was like, okay, so I know I could have done something better. I'm not sure what, but I can't take it all personally, because there were a couple of things that there's just, sometimes you have a bad event. And I still haven't been able to shake that off. And hopefully for 2025, I will go I'm rethinking of how do I go to events and how I participate, just because I want to have fun, and I don't have to make a ton of money, but I can't lose a lot of money.
Right. Yeah. It's a business.
So
yeah.
if I can do that, I'm doing good.
Yeah, it's interesting because one thing you said was talking about like kind of watching other people. And that's what I've learned from events where maybe I'm not doing as well. And especially earlier on when I was first doing events and, going there and not really knowing how many books to bring and what I needed to do. And being believe it or not, I'm an introvert. So having a hard time kind of breaking that wall. But I learned a lot from watching other people at those events. So I didn't take them as losses because I took that information and I moved forward. And now I do a lot better because and sometimes I would just go up and ask people, say, hey, how did you handle this? Or what do you do for this? And one thing I can say about other authors is they're always really friendly and really helpful. And they'd be like, yeah, this is what I did. I had an event earlier this year and it wasn't a great event. But this guy next to me, I noticed he was a couple of tables down and he was always on his feet, just always interacting. And so when he had a pause, I went over and I just chatted with him. I said, hey, I noticed you're always standing. He's like, oh, yeah. I said, don't your feet hurt? He said, oh, yeah. He's like, but I realized, but if I stand and I just interact, he goes, I'm not, and he never forced a sale. He wasn't yelling at people. He wasn't being rude. He was just being friendly. And then he had other ideas that I was like, those are really good ideas. And so I learned from that. So that wasn't a loss for me. That was a learning experience for me. And that's how I try to move forward. So, but yes, it is a business and we have to make money. So like ultimately we can't lose money in the process, but it is really good to like have the mindset of what can I learn while I'm here? And I think you have that as well.
No, it's work smart. And I was trying to be cautiously optimistic, but my cautious optimism, it was still way beyond when you don't get to, and the thing is that another thing that I did learn is that I didn't make certain sales at the event, but I made a good impression. And in one occasion it was 2 weeks after the event, and in another occasion it was 4 months after the event. People bought my books that went to the event and we interacted there. So that's another lesson. And even though I had a crap event and sales weren't great, 2 people, because one dragged the other, actually went to the event because of something that I posted. You're like,
Right.
oh, I saw that you were coming and I needed to come to visit you. And I'm like, and who are you that doesn't follow me on social media but know who I am? And they were like, I came to see you and to buy this book. And I'm like, and I have a pretty good memory. And I'm like, we've never interacted on Twitter. But she said, you posted this and did that. And I'm like, okay, next time, like and share what caught your attention so that maybe someone else will join along. And thank you. Because I found that out when I was like, man, this is going to be a bad event. And it's like, I came because of you. And I'm like, I did not expect that, but thank you.
Yeah. And it is important to remember that like we're making impressions when we're at events. So even if we're at an event, we're not making sales. If you get all pissy and have your arms crossed and you're complaining about the event, people see that and they're going to remember you for that. But if you're like, hey, it's good to see you. Yeah, whatever. They also remember that. So it's really important to just, stay with positive attitude no matter how the event's going. Interact with people because you never know.
And in that event, I think my highlight was that there's a mom and she lost her kid. And I was like, what was your kid wearing? And she's like, she's wearing this, but I don't know where she's at. And I'm like, stay here because I think I saw her. And I did see her. So I basically went out of my booth and I went on this rescue mission. And I found the kid and I was like, your mom is at my booth. Let's go. Oh, I'm lost. And I'm like, I know you're lost. And don't worry. We're going to get there. You're close by. And I took her back and she was like, oh, thank you. And then I think she did a pity buy, which wasn't my intention. But, at the very least, I was like, I don't need to sell you a book.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to pull up the Wheel of Death. The first time wheel. We'll do a couple of those just for some fun to wrap this up. So let me present real quick. Let's see. Share my screen. Should be this one. Yeah. All right.
Now I see the wheel. Sorry, I had some technical issues with my headphones.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and spin it and let's see what it lands on, and we'll get some answers. All right. So first activity. And what I meant by that was, what was the first thing that you kind of, got into, that when you were younger, it was a thing that was like, this became your activity, like the thing you wanted to do when you had free time?
Reading comics and playing video games. I think video games started way earlier, but those are the two things that I really leaned into passionately. And then when my brother saw that the power of the geek was too strong in me, he's like, you also have to surf.
Good for him.
And good for me. That's the only thing in my life that's been in post that I'm thankful for, and that actually was good for me. But yeah, playing video games, it just connected intensely. And then a couple of years later, I connected with comics. The thing is that people connect with X-Men or connect with Spider-Man or Fantastic Four if they're into DC, Superman, or Batman. I connected with J-Ben comics, which are Hong Kong comics.
Okay.
And while people were reading all of those titles, I was reading The Bloodsword Dynasty, Iron Marshal, Drunken Fist, The Force of Buddha's Palm. And all of this is part of my genetic and creative makeup. And I gravitated towards those comics so much because I'm a big fan of Big Trouble in Little China. That is my favorite movie, and it has always been my favorite movie. And when I read those comics, I was like, this is my jam.
That's awesome. Yeah. I was a big comic book kid too. I was in New York at the time when I was a kid, and a lot of winters we would sit on the porch and just read comics while it was snowing outside. So, but my first thing popularly was roller skating, which I still do. So yeah. All right, let's do another one. Let me share the screen again, and we'll do one more. All right. All right, first life goal. So that can really be anything. When you were young, you said, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be, what did you want to be? What was your goal in life?
Well, again, I wanted to be an inventor. So I just didn't know that I was going to end up doing it using words. But my first life goal, I think that my first novel was a life goal that I didn't know that I had until I had it. It's something that kind of snuck up on me, because sometimes when kids are like, I want to be a police officer or a fireman or an astronaut, or now they want to be an influencer, or they want to be a mumble rapper and stuff like that. It's like, dude, they want to dance on TikTok. I'm so happy that I grew up in the 80s. Just because I like how I am, and I like the goals that I have, and I really like the childhood that I had, because I went from analog to digital, and I had that hybrid upbringing, and I think I got the best of both worlds, and I got a really sweet deal in terms of, I got some of the best cartoons, if not the best cartoons. I got great candy, and so I think that the first goal, I think writing that book was. And it was an evolving goal, because first I wanted to be published by a major publisher. I saw that I wasn't getting any bites, and I had to adjust. And I was like, okay, you can either persist and persevere and do the thing, or you can do it on your own terms. And where I was in my life, I really needed it to be on my own terms. And so doing that goal and reading the book, I read it early this year. I read it last year. Rereading that book and what I achieved and how I achieved it, I'm really, really proud of that book. Warts and all, grammar issues and whatnot. The story, I got one of the goals. Now it's to just make it bigger and not do it again. Do something different and do something fun.
Yeah. Continue to evolve all the time. That's what I say. Always evolving.
Always.
Well, it looks like we're almost out of time. So I want to first of all thank everybody for tuning into the show, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. You go ahead and let people know where they can find you, where they can get your books or any events you might be doing.
So events, I'm not doing any events apart from doing online things. I will be participating with two classrooms. One is in Vermont, and the other one is in either North Carolina or Virginia. I can't. I think it's Virginia. So I want to do more of that. If you're a teacher or know a teacher and you want this mug to talk to your kids about writing to hopefully get them involved, do that. My books are available. Yes, they're on the Zon, but if you want to support my writing, check independent bookstores in Puerto Rico. I always recommend Tazas y Portadas, but Serendipia has my books. La Librería El Laberinto has my books. El Rincón del Lector, and these are all Spanish names. Make the effort and support a small business, just because a sale for them, if I'm going to split the money with someone, I want it to be people that I'm happy to support, not a mega corporation. I am thankful for the mega corporation because thanks to them, I can get to places that I can't get otherwise. And if you're stateside in Puerto Rico or you're willing to pay a ridiculous amount of shipping, I'm also doing Estrada crates, which is just me upcycling boxes and stuff like that with my books. And I'm happy to send them along. Very cool. Where to find me? Here's my name. If I'm on a social media platform, I'm going to be under that name. And if you're an upcoming writer, try to be able to get the same name on all platforms, and you will thank me later.
Yes. Yeah, that's good advice. And we do appreciate you giving us time, tonight. It was definitely fascinating talking to you. I know we've talked before, but it was good to talk to you again. And again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please feel free to give us a like, give us a share. We always could appreciate that. And don't forget, it's always time for Go Indie Next.